Are you a dentist looking to build wealth, maybe create passive income, and be able to eventually step away from the chair? Are there things that you feel like you should or could be doing, but you just don't know where to start? Hi, I'm Jonathan Moffat, a wealth strategist who's built and sold an 8-practice DSO. Now, I help dentists align their practice success with their personal financial freedom. Each week on this podcast, you'll discover strategies to boost your practice profitability, multiply your wealth, and transform your dental career into the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. This is Dental Wealth Multiplier.
All right, welcome. This is Jonathan Moffat. With me again is my brother, Austin Moffat, who runs DSO CFO. Austin, thanks for being on here again.
Yeah, pleasure.
So today we're going to talk about kind of a topic I think is really a passion for both you and I. And it's something that's coming up, I mean, literally every single day, this idea around, what are the financial habits of successful practice owners? What do we kind of, you look at what you guys was on a call the other day, you said you look at about over 250 sets of books every single month for practices all over the country?
Yeah, close to. I think it's really unique, right? Because, look, we're looking at single practices, private equity-backed DSOs, private doctor-ran DSOs, small, multi-locations that aren't quite, DSOs. But it's, from New York to Florida to Washington to Southern, it's kind of all across the country, Midwest, some kind of in the boonies of the United States. So it's such a unique experience to be able just to kind of see what's happening across the industry, not necessarily even like in a state or a region, but just overall. And I think what's unique is that some of the questions and the topics are fairly consistent for the most part. It doesn't matter, if you're private equity backed, 20 practice location or a single practice, a lot of the conversations are somewhat similar.
Yeah, I think we have a really interesting perspective and unique viewpoint from the standpoint that we are literally talking to dentists all over the country in various stages of not only their practice, but their lives, right? So for the most part, most of our clients have been in practice for 10 to 15 plus years, have successful practice or practices, right? But we certainly see kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, right? And then once you've been, just like anything, you've been doing this long enough, you just kind of see, oh, hey, there's a trend here that's actually like the practices that tend to be the type of doctor, the type of practice that tends to be profitable, that always has money left over, that the doctors are getting paid what they need to get paid, they're funding their personal goals, they're right, less stress around it. Like there's a trend, there's like certain things that they're doing that I think we're going to get into and talk about today. Like, what are those habits? So, what do you think, the differences, if you were to kind of list out, these are some of the differences that I see and recognize between a dentist who just is kind of getting by, right, versus a dentist who's thriving financially. What do you think, what would you say are some of those habits or skill sets that they've developed and are implementing that kind of set them apart?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's layered, honestly. I think the highest layer, if you will, it's, do you have practice financial goals, that you are tracking on a regular basis, and what do I mean by goals? Well, let's just start at the top. Do you have, revenue goals by month, and you can even drill down by producer, right, that you are holding yourself or others accountable to, that are setting and hitting or not, but at least you're tracking that goals, right? And then from there, it's, do you know what you want to be spending? Like, do you have a budget, or do you know what you should be spending, or at least not overspending in some areas like your clinical related expenses or payroll, right? I mean, I think for me, and I've gone on this soapbox quite a few times, but for me, the clinical, in terms of from an expense standpoint, clinical expenses and payroll, that's your 1-2 punch. That's about 61% of your overall revenue goes just in those two areas of just about every practice across the country. So, do you have goals? Are you tracking those goals? Are you holding yourself and others accountable to your goals? Are you looking to see when you overshoot, said goals, are you understanding why did we go over this, right? Are you making adjustments? So that's from the highest level. It's just, do you have goals? Yes or no? Are they realistic? Yes or no? Right. And then are you tracking them and then holding others accountable? So that's, for me, that's the highest, believe it or not, we have a true story. We met a doctor in the last five days, and she didn't really know like she has 4 locations. She didn't really know, not even goals, but she didn't even really know what she did in revenue last year. And I thought that was kind of unique, right? I think for the most part, we can all confidently say, what was done in revenue, but she didn't know that. We drilled down into production, collections. What is your collection percentage? And she didn't know that. So, we conveyed to her on this call that, you're probably leaving several thousands of dollars at least on the table. Right. And so, anyways, I think that's number one. And I think as you drill down, right, because then it becomes custom, right, to your business. It becomes custom to your practices. You can have 5 practices, and each one of them has their own like unique, right, take, if you will, or unique strategy or model, right? But I think the other one too is, if you drill down, it's how well do you know your numbers, and then honestly, it's how well do you know your team. Right? Is your team performing? And not just at the clinical level either, right? At the front desk, do you know your numbers? Do you know your marketing return on ad spend? If you're spending $3,000 a month on marketing, do you know what you're actually getting in new patient revenue, foot traffic, all that stuff, right? Through the door. And I think that's super important to know. So, these doctors that just crush it, in my opinion, they know their numbers very, very well.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a couple podcasts ago about this idea that I think a lot of times practices, when they find themselves they feel like they're getting into trouble, they're feeling this stress, is they feel like they can kind of spend their way out of it, right? And so it's like, or just like, oh, if I had more revenue, if I had more of this, and the reality is that's not actually going to fix the problem, because like we were talking about this before the podcast. I mean, we have clients who have a practice doing $4 or $5 million. I mean, one client specifically we talked about yesterday doing over $4 million a year, and they still are struggling with some of these principles. I think for me, and I think what you're saying is, you have to know your numbers. You have to get in and treat it like a business. I mean, this is a business, right? It's like, it's a practice. You have all these things, and you always hear this kind of this analogy of not analogy, but like this comparison that dentists are both the clinician and the business owner, and they're wearing all these different hats, right? And a lot of other businesses do that too. It's just when you have that kind of small business mentality, you're just like, oh, I have to wear all these hats. Where if you want to have the mentality of a top performing business owner, dentist, then you have to change some of those mindsets. And I think the reality is you have to be able to, like, if you're like, the numbers bore me, or I don't like setting goals, or I know if we set goals, I'm not going to hold everyone accountable. That's fine. Like, you have to be able to recognize that, right? Admitting that's the first step, right? Like, hey, this is not like my cup of tea, right? We all have those things. I certainly have those things within my business. I had to go hire people that was their strong suit, let them run with that, and so that I can focus on it. But not paying attention to those numbers, not being willing to get in and know your numbers, I would say it, like, if I were to actually narrow it down to, like, if there's just one thing that you did on a consistent basis, it is get in and know your numbers, know your practice, know what those numbers are, and know what those numbers mean, right? We hear a lot, especially recently, of like, hey, my practice isn't profitable. What do we need to get more profit out of my practice? And you kind of already alluded to it before, which is, well, I would start by focusing on what's your number one biggest expense, which is employees, which is your team members.
Correct.
Are they out? Is their output enough? Is what they're contributing to the business enough to not only offset what you're paying for them to do that, but to do their jobs, but also to generate profit, right? Mm-hmm. And what metrics do you have in place to measure that, right? And I think if you're to go through like all the clients that we work with and go, okay, who are the top performers? These are the top performers. What's one common thread that they have, that all of them have? It's that they know their numbers. They're in their numbers every single day, week, month, quarter. They are in those numbers. They know their numbers, right? You go, what was your gross production or net adjusted production or collections, whatever, from last month? They're going to know those numbers, right?
Yeah.
Where's your biggest area that you need to focus on to improve? They're going to know what that is, right? Because they're in there regularly. They know those numbers.
Totally. I mean, so we have a client, on the East Coast. They have 9 locations. And it's actually pretty cool story. The doctor, he actually stopped working in the chair about 2.5 years ago. And so it's a relatively newer transition for him, right? I mean, as we all know, right? And, you need to start producing more, especially when your primary producer, the doctor owner, who, by the way, no one's going to care more about your patients in the business, right, than the business owner. And so a little downswing in the transition, but so that was a little unique to him. But I'll tell you, and I said this to you yesterday, when you and I were kind of just talking after work. But I mean, I don't know if there's too many people out there that know their practice numbers like this doctor does. He knows all the metrics, all the numbers, production, net production. I mean, you name it. He knows exactly what he spent, what he's getting back on marketing. He actually shared that with me the other day. I actually couldn't believe the numbers. They're actually using SMC, who I think has been really, really good for them. But he said that he's getting a 7x, 6 and 7x return on his spend, which is like pretty awesome. But he knows, like, hey, if I want to grow this thing, if I inject $12,000 a month in marketing across my entire organization, I can expect revenue to go up by X amount, right? And we've created a forecast for him. We actually recently, this week, met with this bank to go get additional funding for them. He's looking to make some pretty awesome changes and some growth strategies to his group. And so we met with their bank, and one of the things that we went to them was a forecast, but it's because he knows his numbers. He showed the history, what they did last year compared to this year. He has a custom report that shows, January 2024 versus January 2025. And then he has it broken down by the week, right? So he gets it down by week, by location, right? He tells you he had a report where he showed like the seasonality, right? Seasons that are high, seasons that are low. For them, it was June, September, November, December were like their low seasons, right? And he said, hey, here's what we're going to do to combat this. We're starting now to inject more marketing, right? So that when June hits, we're not going to be experiencing as much as a dip. I mean, what an awesome position to be in, right? For this guy, like, he knows what levers to pull. You know what I mean? And look, it's not a science, right? Because who knows? But I mean, logically, that makes sense. He's got history. He's got the data on his side. So it's just, at this point, it's just adding 1 + 1, at this stage. And hey, look, it might not be 100%. Maybe June really does suck on the East Coast. Maybe everyone wants to get out of there and go to Hawaii. You know what I mean? Like with school graduation.
They go to the East Coast, they go to the Bahamas. On the West Coast, we go to Hawaii.
Yeah, no, that's true. But
the point is that he's tracking it, right? And it's funny because you say that, it reminded me, the first dental practice that we bought was this practice and in Southern California, and the doctor is funny. He was cleaning out his office. We closed on the practice, and he'd worked it, but he was done. He's retiring. He was cleaning out his office. I was helping him move some stuff, and he had this around his entire office, just like not the outside office, but just his, the doctor's office. He had, I'm not even kidding you, it was literally grid paper that he had taped, and he had kept track every single day. He would go in and write, this is what we produced, this is what we collected, this is what we produced, this is what we collected every single day. And he had it for like decades. And it was this long, like accordion written out, like spreadsheet that he had just tracked the trend. And I remember I was like, man, I was like, hey doc, this is pretty cool. What do you do with this information? He's like, no, nothing. I just like to track it. I think it's interesting or whatever. And I'm like, so you're tracking the data, but it wasn't actually doing or implementing or doing anything with it, right? Which in this case with our client on the East Coast, like he's not only tracking the data, but he's actually able, because he's tracking the data, he's seeing trends, he's able to proactively get ahead of any potential downturn or slow point in his practice, which every practice has that, right? He knows like, who are my top performers? Who are my, right? And he's in touch with them. He's talking to them. What he's analyzing, why does this producer contribute X to the practice versus this other producer that isn't producing that, and how can we better support them? And you're just always tracking that. I know we have, again, I would venture to say that if we just went and took a collective group of like our top performing clients, they're all doing they all have very, very similar habits.
Yeah, right? Agreed.
The other example you and I were talking about, as far as like just knowing your numbers and getting your numbers and making it a part of your daily, weekly, monthly routine, is we have a very, very profitable client, right? Extremely profitable. And one of their habits is they get in and look at their credit card statements every single week. They're looking at their credit card statements every single week. Was I charged for something that overcharged? Did we buy something that wasn't approved, or we didn't know we were buying? Where are we spending the money? How are we spending the money? They're in there every week. And I think that that's so interesting. Again, when you look at like top performers, they have these habits that they just have kind of developed over time. You're doing these things that, what's the worst case scenario of reviewing your credit card statements on a weekly basis? And how long is it really going to take? 15 minutes to just look through them? But what's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is you don't find anything, and now you know you spent 15 minutes in your business and everything checked out. Like, that's a worst case scenario, right? And so, but it's just like making up your mind to develop these habits. And again, if you're not that person, you're like, man, this is like numbers bore me, whatever, then okay, then you need to outsource or delegate that to someone else. You need to have a team, subject matter experts that you can delegate that to, that are going to be looking at those numbers for you, that you can trust, things like that. We're not going to really talk about we may mention a few red flags here in a little bit, but we'll have a separate podcast where we actually dig into some of the biggest red flags that we see in practices that don't experience this level of success. But I think another habit of high performing performers, these high performing practices, is this idea of a lot of times as business owners, we put ourselves at the end of the line, right?
Yeah.
We give the most time. We're usually the first in, last to leave. A lot of times we pay ourselves last, right? Sometimes there's not enough money left over in the practice to pay ourselves, which is really crazy, because you think about it like, it's your business, you're putting in all the risk, you're putting in all the time. You didn't go into business not to make money. And so
exactly.
Let's talk about this concept, this other idea that I think a lot of these highly successful practice owners have in common, which is making sure that they take care of themselves first.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like you're in business, for a handful of reasons, but one of those is to get paid. I mean, how enthusiastic are you going to be as a business owner if you're taking it on the chin, month in, month out, right? It's not fun, right? And so the idea really, it's and there's so many approaches, that you can go. If as an owner, you should be the first one to get paid. It's your business, right? It's you're the one that's making the decisions. Look, in a tough position, if cash flow is a little bit tight, look, you've gotten paid. Look, let's just say, you have a vendor that is squeaking for money. Look, you can hop on a call and say, hey, look, can we work out a deal? Can we create a payment plan? Can we do this? Can we do that? 9 times out of 10. And look, I'll tell you, I started my career as an accounts payable specialist right out of school. I'll tell you, 75% of my job was like relationship management with these vendors. I worked at a custom wheelchair company in San Diego. And, we were struggling. We had months that were tough, and, we had to deal with insurances too. So a lot of it had to do with timing issues. And so I had to go to these vendors and say, hey, here's what's going on, right? No BS, but here's what's going on. Can you work with us? 9 times out of 10, yeah, no problem, right? And so anyways, so that's like not necessarily worst case scenario, but if there's a fear, trust me, that fear can get squashed because it can be very easily sorted out. But the other thing too is that we see is that if you're a practice owner and you own the building, it's so easy when cash is tight to say, hey, let's forego rent this month, right? It's not a big deal, right? We'll get it sorted out. Not a big deal. But I mean, look, it's your business. It's your asset. Everything's under your name at the end of the day. You're the most important employee when it comes down to it, period. You're the most important aspect of that business, period, right? So you deserve, and frankly, you should be the first one to get paid. And it's not unfair. I mean, again, you would do the same thing if you had one of your highest producing doctors, right? You're going to make sure he gets his, right? You're going to make sure that he's fed, make sure that he's happy so that he doesn't go across the street and go somewhere else, right? You're going to make sure he's happy, he's doing that. Well, guess what? That's you at the end of the day, right? And so I think it's so easy to say, hey, I'm square, I'm good, right? But really, profits first. I mean, every business owner should be the first one in. To your point, Jonathan, it's the oftentimes the first one in, last one out. A lot of times we don't get full weekends, right? We've got business stuff that's occupying our minds, at 9:30 at night, right? On a Saturday, right? So we're huge advocates for this, and it's something that we're pushing, for all of our clients, because again, that business isn't going to exist. A, if you're not getting paid. B, if you're not happy. And C, certainly if you're not there.
Yeah, I think just to get it, and we talk about some of these percentages, but just as a rough rule of thumb, if you're a general dentist, if you're the only producer, you should be shooting for about a 40% profit margin. And if you have associates, obviously that's going to go down because you got to pay your associates. Dr. Roman and I talked a little bit about that in a prior podcast. But if you're an all associate run, meaning you're the owner doctor or the owner and you're not doing any dentistry, then you should be shooting for around 20 to 23, 24%. We certainly have some clients that are higher than that, but that's the kind of industry average you should be shooting for. But what we would do, one of the common mistakes I see a lot of times is like if a doctor has associates or has multiple locations and that doctor goes and fills in, hey, we need you to come to this office, we need you to fill in, or we need you to place implants or do whatever. It's interesting how many of those doctors don't pay themselves as an associate. They just go in and do it and they're like, oh, I'll just take the money out of the profits. Yeah. Well, guess what? How 99% of you guys are calculating these profits is just like whatever's left over at the end. There's a lot of times there's not a lot left over at the end because it all gets eaten up. And so one of the first things that we recommend, it's what we implemented in our practices with my partner. Anytime my partner would come in and do dentistry in one of the practices, he got paid as the same amount that we would have had to have paid any other doctor to come in and do that. Right? If he was placing an implant, he got 40 to 50% because that's what we would pay an oral surgeon to place the implant, meaning compensation wise, not obviously that's what we would pay him as compensation, right? If he came in and did the dentistry, we'd pay him 30, 32%, just like we would any other associate. And he would get that paid. And as a practice, we had to make sure that we had that money. I mean, there's like no other, he should get paid because he rendered the same services that another doctor that would have come in and done that would have done also. And so stop putting yourself last. Put a process in place. And again, we'll have a separate episode where we can go really deep into this and give you like a specific step-by-step guide for how to do this. But generally how you want to generally do it is you have all your income go into an account. And the first thing you do is you pull out your profit. And again, if you're like, well, I don't know how much my profit is, like just start with a number, start with something, 4%, 5%. Like, I don't know what my profit is. Next is you pay yourself. So at a minimum, if you're practicing, you should be paying yourself 30, 32, 35%, whatever you want to, again, of what you're producing. And there, if you just want a starting point, that's a starting point. But you have to start somewhere. You have to then know, okay, I paid myself 5% profit, 35% because for any of the clinical production that I did, just like I would any other associate. Oh my gosh, I had money left over at the end. This is great. Okay, great. Yeah. Next month, bump it to 7% or 10% or whatever. But you have to start that process. And again, a real life example here is we have a client who has 4 practices. Doctor was practicing a little bit, but his goal is really to step away from the chair, as it is with most of our clients. And they had a management company, so he has a management company, and the management fee was like 11%. And he was like, guys, there's never enough money at the end of the month to pay me my management fee.
Yeah.
And so he's like, so therefore the model's not working, right? He's like, there just isn't enough money. And so we said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to chop it up into weekly payments. And so every single week, you're going to pay that week's portion of the management fee. And since we started doing that, he has never missed a management fee ever. He hasn't missed it. And I'm telling you, if you implement this process of pay yourself first, and then you have all your expenses of your practice. And again, it gets way more specific than this. And again, we'll do a separate episode on how this works. Our experience is when you do that, guess what? All of a sudden, now you're going to start getting paid what you deserve and what you owe. You deserve, but what you need to operate. Again, that's a whole other exercise of how much should I pay myself and all that. Start with, if you're producing, you pay yourself 32%, just like you would an associate. Start with that. Tack on top of that some profit. If you're afraid, I don't think we have money, start with a low number, see what happens, see what you end up with at the end of the month.
I think, sorry, real fast, just on that, I think that's such a cool story and case study, if you will. I mean, I immediately think of like the elephant analogy, right? One bite at a time, right? I mean, look, 11% of the overall monthly revenue, that's gonna be a tough pill to swallow from like one huge bank transfer. But if you split it up into 4.5, whatever periods, that's way more easy to digest. And look, let's go, not worst case scenario, but let's go in a scenario where maybe you don't get paid, that full. Look, getting paid a management fee 2 weeks out of 4 is a heck of a lot better than 0. You know what I mean? So like, again, and there's probably another discussion in there, but I mean, I think what's so cool about this specific scenario and this doctor is that we've been doing this for about 2 months, and I don't think we've missed a week with him. We're the ones, we get the reports, we tell him how much to transfer based on the percent of collections for the week. We provide the bank balances so that we show, hey, you can go ahead and transfer this much money per location, right? Here's the available bank balance. So you're not bleeding, the account's dry, the practice is dry, everything's healthy, like there's no anxiety, there's no stress. But what it's done for the doctor, I feel like it's allowed him to dream a little bit more too, because now he's looking at he's looking at a building. He wants to acquire a building where he wants to move one of his smaller practices in that he feels like he could really blow up, and then he would have a big asset, and then he already has rental income in there. Plus, he would dedicate an entire floor to this practice and blowing. I mean, look, he's dreaming, right? Because I think he is feeling like, oh, like this actually does work. It was just the method that I was doing it maybe wasn't the best method, but this other method is totally working. And at the end of the day, I'm getting exactly what I'm wanting to get or expecting to get. And so that's been really cool. I mean, the dreaming hasn't stopped from there. I mean, it's been like, well, this is awesome. Our model now works. What if we go to a different state or different regions or wherever? So it's been really fun just to kind of see that optimism, that light bulb, if you will, just go, man, this actually, like, my model does work, and this is working. So let's go ham, right? It's been a lot of fun to be a part of.
Yeah, and again, I think it's with purpose. Look, we were kind of talking beforehand, and really to make this work. And again, I know I said this, we'll do a separate episode on it because it does get very detailed and to the point where you might be even sitting like, this is ridiculous. But the point is, if you find yourself, we were saying like, if I want to get in better shape, right? Which it's that time of year again, right? Almost bikini season. Time for me to get back in shape, right? What is it? Like summer bodies are made in the fall and winter and fall or whatever, or no, fall.
Something like that, yeah.
But the point is, like, if I want to get back in shape, if I want to get in better shape, I know I have to do things that I wouldn't necessarily have to do if I was already in the shape I wanted to be in. For example, I know for me and a lot of other people, like, I have to track what I'm eating. I have to measure it. I have to weigh it. I need accountability. I have to go to the gym. I have to track how much water I'm drinking. How much am I exercising? I have to track my workout. Supplements, all these things, right? That I then have to do because I want to improve my health. And then if you're in a situation, listen to this, like, I'd like to improve my profitability. I'd like to improve, hey, it's actually been a while since I've paid myself or since I've taken any profit out of the practice. Well, then you may need to get more dialed in and more microscopic and more detailed around those specific things that you're going to need to do that you otherwise wouldn't need to do if you're like, no, every month I take home 40% profit, or if I have multi-locations and I'm not practicing, like we have a client, multi-locations, 8 locations, the doctors don't practice any dentistry at all. They take home 30% profit. It's like unheard of, right? But why? Why is that unheard of? That should be, if we know it's possible, why isn't it the norm, right? What are they doing or willing to do that most aren't willing to do, right? I meant to look up before the podcast, didn't look it up. Someone can look it up and post in the comments what percentage of people have a 6-pack, right? It's going to be a really small percentage, right? But it's like, why is that? And it's like, and maybe it's a stupid, like, you know, but again, it just was, I don't know, it's a dumb analogy that popped in my mind, but it's like, well, it's because the people that have those or that are in peak performance or can go run a marathon or go do a full Ironman or even a half Ironman, it's because they're willing to put the work in and do the things that they know are necessary that most other people aren't. And this is the same situation. It's just like these top performers. Okay, guess what? Bar's been set. You can have 8 location group in a very competitive area of the country, all associate run, and get 30% net income. It is possible. You can do it.
Right.
So what are you willing to do to get there? Right? You can have enough money at the end of every month to pay your bills, fund your goals, live the lifestyle you want to, have money set aside for taxes so that when you do get that tax bill, it's not this big surprise, like, where am I going to get the money from? Right?
Yeah.
Like, you can set savings so that if a knock on wood, COVID 2.0 happens and all of a sudden, like, your practice has to be forced to shut down and your bank is coming to you saying, well, you still have to make your loan payments like ours did to us with our practices. You have a cushion to fall back on that you can then not have to stress or worry or go struggle. Like, those things are possible. It's just, are you willing to make it a priority? Are you willing to put the necessary steps and systems in place to do that? And are you willing to be consistent with it? Because those are, in my opinion, again, if we were to kind of make like a common thread through our top performing clients, that's what they all do. That's what they're all doing.
Right. I think, you know, that client with the 30%, and this is a topic for another day, but just going back to kind of the beginning of the discussion, they hold their team accountable like crazy, right? And one of the things, and I'm actually starting to see it be more and more of a thing. I don't know if this is like my own like professional like development. I have no idea. Call it like professional maturity, if you will, but ever since we had that discussion with them several months ago, man, the team members that you have on your squad is so important. And that sounds silly to say out loud. And of course, you want good team members, but I mean, they prioritize that almost as much as they prioritize knowing their numbers, right? Yeah. And you know, but it comes back to the accountability, right? They hold others accountable. If people are willing to meet and stay on track to their standard and their goals, then, you know, you're on the squad, right? Like you're good, right? But they're constantly like vetting potential employees. They're constantly recruiting because and not to like, you know, find something better, but like, you know, because they have so many locations, right? If people aren't meeting their bar, their standard, they're always doing that. Again, that's a topic for another day. But again, you know, it's unheard of. It's actually between it actually averages between about 31 and 33%. These two doctors that we're talking about, and it is pretty unheard of. It's ridiculous. But they have their model. They know that when they go and get, you know, their next location, that they're gonna likely, you know, get the same type of performance out of that practice because it's their model. So
and for anyone listening, if you want to listen to that interview, the episode is Aereo Dental. Austin and we interview them. They break down really specifically what they do. You can find that on our podcast page. So Austin, to kind of wrap up here, I think as far as like some call to actions or some things, you know, again, the other thing that comes to mind is like, what's the difference between top performers and kind of the average or below average? And it's like, and this is again across everything, athletics, school, professional. It's like they're willing to put the work in that others aren't. They're willing to do the things that most other people aren't willing to do. And so you just have to what to do. There's no secrets here. We didn't say, well, not one single thing was like, well, you have to buy this proprietary system. It's like, no, it's all fundamentals. It's kind of like business 101, right? Go pick up a business 101 book, and it's going to be those same things. Understand your numbers, get in, recognize the numbers. What are the metrics and numbers that you need to be tracking that actually move the needle within your practice so that you can have that profitability? Then you take that, and then our job on our end is to help clients mitigate or reduce their taxes as much as possible, so are able to keep as much of that money that they're earning to then go fund the lifestyle and achieve their ideal life that they ultimately really want. And so if you're sitting here thinking like, man, I don't really know where to start, I'd say, Austin, how can they reach out to you and maybe just for like do like a complimentary review of their financials, or even get more information around that kind of paying themselves first before, so that they make sure that they get paid. You mentioned our client who we talked to yesterday is like, my office hasn't paid rent in like 9 months, and like he owns the building, right? So again, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, we always put ourselves last. We had a long conversation with him and his accountant yesterday about, you have to pay the rent. Like, this is a non-negotiable. The rent has to be paid, right?
Correct.
So how can anyone listening want to reach out to you for additional information, or have you specifically look at their financials, or give any one-on-one? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love doing financial analysis. I mean, we do that complimentary to anyone, right? And so we'll look at areas where we think that there's some fat, and we can address those pretty quickly. I'll be honest, but there's a couple good ways. DSOCFO.com, that's our website. Easy way to get a hold of us there. Also, I'm on LinkedIn pretty regularly. So Austin Moffat, Moffat. Should be relatively easy to find me, but you're welcome to message me however you feel like is the best way. But we're super open, and again, we love doing the analysis. We love talking shop. We love discussing and learning about practices, some things you have going on. There's always an option. There's always the way I see it, there's always a solution or an option to get things a little bit better. So.
Awesome. Well, Austin, thanks for being on here. Again, we'll have the links in the show description as well to how to get a hold of Austin. And if you have any questions or comments or anything we didn't address that you're hoping that we could address on our next call as we dive into what sets these successful practices apart from others, please send us a message, leave us a comment, and let us know what more you'd like us to cover in our next episode. Thanks, Austin. Appreciate you being on here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Dental Wealth Multiplier. To make sure you don't miss an episode, go ahead and click the subscribe button. You can also visit us at dentalwealthmultiplier.com to get access to the links or materials mentioned in today's podcast. You can also see other episodes and get access to the most recent reports, tools, and information to continue your wealth building journey.